Committee, I understand that we have a quorum, so let's call this meeting to order. Please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. So Steph, please do the roll call of all the members.
Thank you, Chair. I will go through the list of members. Please indicate you're present when I call your name. Mayor Gallego. Mayor Giles.
Here.
Thank you. Chair Hartke.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Hermosillo.
Here.
Thank you. Firstborn. Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wires.
I'm here.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone who's joined recently? No. Thank you, Chair. We have quorum.
All right, thank you so much. Our next item is call to the audience. MAG provides the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. They're not on the agenda. Informational items are items on the agenda for discussion and not for action. Members of the public are invited to submit written comments via MAG's website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with committee members in advance of the meetings for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Staff, have we received any online written comments for call to the audience?
Thank you, Chair. We have not received any comments for today's meeting or for any other agenda item.
All right, thank you so much. Item number 3 are informational items. So items 3A through 3B are for information only. Does any member of the committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing none, our next on our agenda is item number 4, approval of the consent agenda. With that, items 4A through 4F are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing none and seeing Gilbert Mayor Peterson shake her head vehemently, we will move on. And again, staff, you mentioned that we have no online written comments for any of the consent agenda items or others. So is there a motion to approve consent items 4A through 4F?
I move to approve, Chair, items 4A through 4F.
We have a
Second, Mayor
motion
Hermosillo.
and second motion by Gilbert Mayor Peterson, second by Mayor Hermosillo. Those who are participating in the meeting can now take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. We do need to see the faces of everyone because you're so good looking. Plus, to participate in this voice vote. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call. Staff will only call on virtual participants who did not turn on their cameras. So, can I have a voice vote? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Members, leave your cameras on still. Staff, is this sufficient for our roll call?
Yes, thank you, Chair. All the cameras and mics were on, and the motion passes.
What a highly intelligent group of mayors we have. Item number 5, the air quality update. This is on the agenda for information and discussion, and Matt Poppin, Environmental Director, will present the update. Matt.
Thank you, Chairman Harkey and members of the committee. Yeah, today I wanted to spend some time to give you the latest information on ozone and PM 2.5 as we've hit some sort of milestone dates that I wanted to cover with you all. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that's familiar to a lot of mayors that we've shown before, but when I start talking about ozone, I always want to start with this slide first because this is sort of the major challenge that is always in front of us as we deal with ozone. And again, what I really want to highlight with this slide is you can see that dotted blue line, which represents ozone concentrations beginning back in 2000 all the way through 2022. And as you can see, starting in about 2015, 2016, ozone concentrations have gone up. The line in green represents what ozone concentrations would be if we were to remove wildfires from that graph. But I think what's the challenge that we've discussed before is that ozone concentrations have gone up despite the fact that the emissions from the sources in our region, the man-made emissions, have continued to decline. And again, those are the columns represented by the light gray and the dark gray bars there. So VOC emissions and NOx emissions continue to decline in our region, but ozone concentrations, unfortunately, continue to go up. And this remains our kind of number one challenge as we try and address ozone. Next, please. So as an update, through August 1st, 2024, we have had 42 exceedance days when at least one monitor in the ozone non-attainment area exceeded the standard. I checked again this morning and we're up to 50 days. So we have not seen an improvement this year in our ozone concentrations. Next slide. And also, just as a reminder, it's the fourth highest value that is used to determine compliance with the standard. And that's averaged over 3 years. So the fourth highest value right now is about 80 parts per billion. So we're still looking like our 3-year average is going to be right around 80 parts per billion as the ozone season moves forward.
Just so I can explain that to other people, can you remind me what the fourth highest exceedance day is, please? The fourth highest value?
Yeah, we don't know that for sure yet, right? We still have some more, we can still get exceedances all the way through August and then all the way through September. So once we have all of the data available, we'll sort the data by the highest day, exceeding day, and then we'll rank it, and that will determine what the fourth highest day is. So I think it's a day in July right now. I don't remember the actual date, and it will change as time goes on. And I would say again, each monitor has a different set of days, right? Like for example, the Buckeye monitor has very few exceedances as compared to monitors in the Central or East Valley, which have a lot of exceedances. So each monitor will have a different fourth highest day. What we're judged against is the very highest monitor. So whatever monitor has the worst ozone values, that's the one we're judged against. And that's historically been lately, the Mesa monitor has been the one that's been the highest so far.
Okay, thank you. And welcome, Mayor Gallego.
Thank you. While you're mentioning that, Matt, I assume this regulation was written by folks in the East who weren't worried about wildfires. What problem were they solving by saying fourth highest day?
You know, it's a good question, Mayor and Chairman Harkey. This is supposedly a health-based standard, right? And so I think the thinking was with the fourth highest value, it was that sort of represents a certain exposure that the population is exposed to. And so they didn't want to just pick the maximum value, which would be your first exceedance. But I'm not sure exactly how they came up, honestly, with the fourth highest value. But that's what EPA decided to land on.
It sounds a bit like a movie title, the fourth highest value.
No. And it's even worse, right? Because you have to average it over 3 years. So it's always backwards looking too, which is hard to grasp at times.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I do want to mention on this slide, I have been asked to join with other executive directors of Western regional planning organizations like MAG to send a letter to the EPA administrator, the deputy administrator, Mr. Goffman, asking specifically on behalf of each of us in the West for the EPA to do more study about this divergence. I feel good about the letter because of two things. One, Matt and Audra have been working with them on the language in it. And secondly, because they're really following logically on the steps of what we did over the last year and a half in speaking with the EPA. But it is the region, those who are signing on include Denver, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs. There may be one other, but that's the group where we're all experiencing this exact same divergence between decrease, stuff in the air, and ozone actually starting to go back up. And so we're just trying to keep the conversation and the pressure alive with EPA to continue to work on solutions that reflect what's going on in the West. So that letter is probably going to go in the next couple of days. And I just want to let you know that that's been happening here as well.
Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a timeline of some important dates related to the ozone standard that I wanted to review with you as we move forward, because this really informs the planning work that we're going to have to do here at MAG and some of the items that we'll eventually bring through Management Committee and Regional Council, hopefully for approval once we have plans put together. So just as a reminder, back in November of last year was when EPA issued their finding that we failed to submit a moderate area plan, and that triggered a series of sanctions clocks that we're still under. Next slide. So one of the important milestone dates that happened over last weekend, last Sunday, was the moderate area attainment date of August 3rd, 2024. This was the date when the ozone concentrations in the air were supposed to be 70 parts per billion. So if we had met the attainment date, our ozone concentrations would be at 70 parts per billion. Next, please. However, as you can see in the previous chart, we failed to meet that date. Our current value is 80 parts per million, which is 10 parts higher than the 70 parts per billion standard. Next slide. So as a result of that, EPA will be reclassifying our area from a moderate non-attainment area to a serious non-attainment area. EPA under the Clean Air Act has up to 6 months to do this, so they could wait all the way until February 3rd, 2025 to officially reclassify us to serious. And we're not the only area that's going to be bumped up to serious. As Ed mentioned, within the Intermountain West, who has very similar ozone issues to what we experience, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Denver, they also will be reclassified from moderate to serious as well. We tend to think that EPA will do this in a national rule and bump everybody up at the same time, but they don't have to. They can do it separately if they want, but that will be coming. Next slide.
Hey, Matt, question. Do you anticipate that it will be closer to February and get past the politics and kind of see where the pulse is, or do you have any idea at all?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Harkey and members of the committee. We do anticipate that this would likely occur after the election. And not even just from political reasons, just from just for reasons of trying to figure out how to deal with all of these areas. There's going to be, I think, over a dozen areas that are going to be bumped up, in addition to the ones I've mentioned. And there's also that complications of the Congressional Review Act, right? Where if there was an administration change, this could be subject to that as well. So I think all of those things come into play in terms of EPA's timing, but we would be very surprised if EPA bumped us up before the election results were known.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Next bullet. And one more bullet, please. So I wanted to again mention that we are currently under those sanctions clocks, but thankfully we do have a plan to turn off those clocks. So EPA is going to allow us to submit a plan that will address what are known as the outstanding moderate area requirements to turn off the sanctions clock. Now, obviously, we weren't able to show attainment by the moderate area attainment date, but there are a lot of other Clean Air Act requirements that still exist that a moderate area is supposed to do. EPA has indicated to us that if we submit a plan demonstrating that we have met all of those other requirements before those first sanctions date, that will turn off the sanctions clocks. So that's definitely something we're going to be doing. That will likely come through policy committees in January or February for your approval, that plan. And then we'll get that up and submitted to EPA before that first sanctions date is triggered. As long as EPA finds the plan complete, that will turn off those sanctions clocks and we will no longer be under those sanctions. Next bullet. Kind of shifting back to, so while that's going on, we're still thinking about what we have to do for the serious area plan. So that plan will be due January 1st, 2026. So in my next slide, you'll sort of see we're working on all of these in parallel. So as we work on a plan to turn off the sanctions clock, we'll also be working to develop a plan to address the serious area as well. And last bullet, please. The serious area attainment date will be 3 years from the prior one, so August 3rd, 2027. So in order to meet that attainment date, air quality at the monitors should show attainment by August 3rd, 2027, which is actually the 2026 ozone season. So we're going to be looking at air quality data from 2024, 2025, 2026, that 3-year average period. That's what will be used to determine if we make that attainment date or not. Next slide. So in summary, I wanted to summarize our efforts that we're doing to address these requirements. Next slide. So first, as I mentioned, we're going to be developing a plan to turn off the moderate area sanctions that will be developed and submitted to EPA before that first sanctions clock is triggered. Next bullet. Second, we're going to be developing an approvable serious area plan for submittal to EPA. And so where we are currently with that process is we're developing the emissions inventory and the photochemical modeling that we need to do to determine how much ozone reductions are needed to meet the standard. And that will also help us determine what type of plan we feel like we can submit to EPA. Coming up at the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee meeting this August, I'll be presenting preliminary emissions for 2017 and 2026. So that will really help us understand how much additional reductions are going to be needed. And then last bullet on this slide, as Ed mentioned, we continue to press EPA in continued engagement with them to address our regional big picture challenges, right? So in addition to this regulatory work we're doing for items 1 and 2, we also continue to engage with EPA for new science to explain that divergence we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, and also to request regulatory relief from ozone exceedances related to wildfires and international transport. So all 3 of these efforts are continuing in parallel as we move forward. Next slide. So I want to shift gears now to PM 2.5 and give you the latest update with that.
Let's stop just a second.
Sure.
Chet, are there any questions on ozone before we move on to particulate matter? Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll proceed with PM 2.5.
So just as a quick reminder, PM 2.5 are the very smallest particles that can get lodged in your lungs and cause health problems. Next slide, next bullet. So back in February 7th, earlier this year, EPA set a new standard for these fine particles. And again, these fine particles are usually generated through combustion processes or any activity that will disturb the soil. That's what will generate these very fine particles. Next bullet. And as a reminder, EPA significantly strengthened the standard for PM 2.5. The annual standard, it was 12 micrograms per cubic meter, and it was strengthened to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. Next slide. So as we presented back in June, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality has released their draft boundaries for non-attainment areas. Next bullet, please. So this is for Maricopa County, the map is showing what they think the new non-attainment area would be for Maricopa County. And you can see the 3 red dots as a reminder, those are the monitors that currently violate the new PM 2.5 standard. Blue dots are monitors that meet the standard. ADEQ is still in their informal comment period. So they are accepting informal comments from stakeholders and from agencies and from the public to discuss what those boundaries should be. If there's reason, technical data to change those boundaries, ADEQ is considering that currently as on an informal basis. Next bullet. A formal comment period will likely begin in September, where ADEQ will have to formally respond to any comments submitted on these new boundaries, both for Maricopa County, which is shown here, and then there's also one for Pinal County, which is not shown currently on this slide. And then ultimately, ADEQ will have to submit their final recommendations to the governor by January 7th, 2025. Next bullet. And then the governor must submit those boundary recommendations to EPA by February 7th, 2025. Ultimately, a year later, EPA will come out with their boundary. EPA ultimately is the decision-making authority and will set what the boundary is. But there is opportunity right now to provide comment on what that boundary recommendation to EPA will be. And that's the conclusion of my update. If there's any further questions, I'm open to them at this time.
So I'll venture a question. I know when you brought this to the regional council, you had mentioned that there was a meeting of some group immediately after that. Like I don't recall if it was a week or a couple weeks in June to initially go over the boundaries. Is there any more insight that's gelling with this, or is that just for input and decisions are yet to be made?
Yes, Chairman Harkey, members of the committee. There was ADEQ hosted a meeting at MAG. We had them come, and there was an opportunity for members for InterGovs and various other members of any of our member agencies to come and provide to really get information initially on how ADEQ set those boundaries, and then on how they could provide comment. I don't have an update at this time if ADEQ has revised those boundaries. That is something we're going to be talking with them to see if they can give us an update on that. So I don't know how much, if ADEQ has, how much they have received, and if they have already made changes to those informal boundaries. I don't have an update for you on that yet.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Moving on to item number 6, the Executive Director's Report. Ed Zucker.
Thank you, Chairman Harkey, members of the committee. Just very briefly, last week, the chairman was on Arizona Horizon, speaking about the year ahead at MAG. So thank you, Mr. Harkey, Mayor Harkey, for doing that. And we'll send a link out so you can all see that. It was about 7-8 minutes. Really covered the waterfront for MAG, from human services, homelessness, affordable housing, air quality, and of course, Prop 479 that did not go undiscussed, which was great. And speaking of Prop 479, our member agencies, thank you. You continue to put information on your websites so the public has good, clear information about what is in there. Most recently, Mesa, Tolleson, and Phoenix have added information, and many of our other agencies have done so as well. So we're really gratified that the word is getting out. So our residents have good information to make their decisions on as they go to the polls in November. Also, is it tomorrow or Wednesday? Tomorrow, we're hosting here at MAG, August 13th, a technical assistance workshop for member agencies. Many of your staff have signed up for it. Thank you. It is free technical assistance provided by a grant that you accepted as the executive committee from Chase, JP Morgan Chase, to help our members continue to work on affordable housing plans. So we're looking forward to having around 50 folks attend that virtual seminar tomorrow. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions, comments for Mr. Zucker? Hearing none. Item number 7, we have no legislative update today. Proceeding to item number 8, are there any requests from the membership for an item on a future agenda? Hearing none. Item number 9, any comments or announcements from the membership? I look forward to seeing, hopefully most of you, all of you at our annual League of Cities. I know for a couple of our good friends on this board, it might be their last. So we look forward to celebrating Arizona's accomplishments with you and certainly with everyone else as well. So no additional comments or actions requested. Why don't we adjourn this meeting, or recall that we will not be having a regional meeting coming up at the end of this month, and our next Regional Council Exec Committee will be on Monday, September 16th at noon. So with no further business, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules.
Thank you.